I always thought I knew every detail of my house, every piece of furniture, every antique, every corner that had witnessed decades of my life. But that day, at that exact minute, I realized that nothing was truly under my control. The scene began so abruptly, so unexpectedly, that even today, my heart races just remembering it. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I didn't think much of it because my daughter was home, and I imagined she had invited someone over to borrow something, as she had done before. But a few seconds later, a sound cut through the air like a blade. "Ma'am, get down from the mirror!" The scream echoed through the room as if it had been fired from inside my head. I froze for a second, unsure if that voice was real or a figment of my imagination. I dropped the cup so quickly that the tea splashed onto the sink. That scream. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a warning. It was an urgent order, a command typical of someone trained to handle danger, and it sent shivers down my spine. For a moment, I thought someone was feeling unwell, or that something had fallen, but when I turned the corner and saw the scene, I realized that the man, the buyer, had wide eyes, a tense body, and his hand raised as if trying to prevent a disaster. He was standing before my old mirror, the same mirror that belonged to my mother and then to my grandmother, the oldest and most sentimental piece I had in the house. And before I could even open my mouth, he shouted again, "Ma'am, step away. Don't touch the mirror." My first reaction was pure confusion. I wasn't touching the mirror. I wasn't even near it. I just stared, lost, trying to understand what, in God's name, was happening there. My daughter appeared in the corner of the room, pale, breathing rapidly, as if she had been caught doing something forbidden. And that's when the feeling that something much bigger was happening began to grow inside me. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't normal. It wasn't the reaction someone would have upon seeing an antique object, even a valuable one. His expression wasn't one of admiration. It was fear, real fear, deep fear, as if he had found something that shouldn't be there, as if he had recognized a hidden threat. I tried to speak, tried to ask, but my brain seemed frozen, as if the words had lost their way to my mouth. The buyer took 2 steps back, without taking his eyes off the mirror, as if any wrong move could trigger something. With each passing second, my confusion grew. My daughter was motionless, her hands sweaty, and she seemed to avoid my gaze. That's when I felt a pang in my chest, not of physical pain, but of intuition. An intuition that that mirror, that object that held my memories, that was part of my history, contained something I never knew, something my daughter might have discovered before me, something she shouldn't have touched. "Sir, what's happening?" I finally managed to ask, but my voice came out weak, trembling. He raised his hand asking for silence, as if I could ruin something just by speaking. That made me even more nervous. I didn't understand. It didn't make sense. It was just a mirror, an old, large, heavy mirror, with a worn frame and marks of time. A mirror that had seen generations of my family. Why would someone react this way to something so common? While everything around me seemed silent, as if time had stopped, a thought echoed in my mind. I had no idea what was hidden there, and that statement wasn't an exaggeration. I truly didn't know. I felt, almost instinctively, that I was about to discover something that would completely change the way I saw not only that mirror, but my own family. There was a mystery, something hidden, something no one had told me, something that might be there, trapped in that old object, waiting to be revealed at the worst possible moment. As I watched the buyer examining the frame with terrified eyes, I realized that the scene wasn't just strange, it was dangerous. The tension in the air was so strong it felt like the ground would crack beneath our feet. My daughter's breathing was so rapid I could hear it, and at that moment, without telling me why, the buyer pulled his cell phone out of his pocket and began dialing a number, without taking his eyes off the mirror for even a second. My heart raced, my stomach churned. I felt an enormous weight on my shoulders, as if an old premonition had finally awakened. I knew that this story was only beginning, and that the mirror, that mirror that had always been in my living room, was about to reveal a secret that should never have been hidden. When I think of that mirror, I can't see it merely as an object. It was always much more than carved wood and antique glass. It was part of my story, part of my mother's story, part of my grandmother's story, and perhaps part of something I would only understand much later. But before the buyer yelled that afternoon, before the police came to examine every detail of the frame, before my daughter made that terrible mistake, the mirror was a symbol to me, a silent connection to the past, living proof that certain memories never disappear, even when people are gone. The mirror came into my possession when I was just over 20 years old, a few months after my mother passed away. She used to say that mirror was older than the whole house, and it wasn't an exaggeration. It was over 100 years old, coming from an old house my family owned before I was born, when my grandmother was still young. The frame was marked by deep carvings, handcrafted by an artisan whose name no one in the family knew. My mother told me that, when she was a child, she would spend hours in front of the mirror trying to decipher the designs in the wood, shapes that looked like leaves, flowers, strange symbols that I never fully understood. But for her, it all had a special meaning. It was as if that mirror held stories, secrets, and memories that could only be seen by those who were truly part of the family. I remember perfectly the day it was placed in my living room. The smell of old wood filled the entire house. It wasn't a bad smell. It was a smell of history, of time, of life. That characteristic odor of furniture that has survived wars, changes, new beginnings, and losses. When the men brought it in, I remember thinking it seemed too heavy to be just a mirror. It was as if it carried something with it, an energy difficult to explain, but which had always been there, subtle, silent. When I was little, my mother would call me to brush my hair in front of that mirror. I would sit on the little wooden stool while she slowly brushed my hair, telling stories about our family, stories about my grandmother, about her sisters, about a cousin everyone said was too temperamental, about an aunt who disappeared when she was young, leaving behind only an enigmatic letter. I didn't understand much, but I loved that feeling of connection. The mirror reflected not only our faces, but an entire line of ancestors I never knew. And like any curious child, I loved looking at my reflection with different expressions, trying out funny faces and smiles, while imagining that the mirror had a kind of life of its own. Sometimes it seemed like the reflection took a second longer to follow my movement. Other times I noticed that the light hit it in a strange way, forming shadows that my room definitely didn't have. My mother said I had too much imagination, and maybe I did. But the truth is, I always felt there was more to that mirror than anyone knew. After she died, the mirror became my strongest link to her. Many nights, I would sit alone in front of it, holding old photos, trying to remember her voice, her laugh, the way she styled her hair. Sometimes it felt like she was there with me, as if the mirror were a window to something I couldn't see, but could feel, and that feeling lasted for years. Even when life got busy, even when the house changed, even when my daughter grew up, the mirror remained there, witnessing everything. As time went by, I realized that my daughter didn't have the same connection to it. To her, it was just an old, heavy, unfashionable object. She never understood the sentimental value that mirror had for me, and I don't blame her. Objects gain value when they carry stories, and she didn't live the same memories I did. She saw the mirror as an antiquated piece taking up space. I saw it as my mother's last intact inheritance. But even so, I always thought my daughter respected that meaning. She never showed any real interest in the mirror, and precisely for that reason, I never imagined she would have the courage to try to sell it. If I had noticed sooner, if I had paid more attention to her expressions, perhaps I could have avoided all the chaos that happened that day. Perhaps I could have prevented the buyer from entering my house. Perhaps none of that would have happened. But at that moment, looking in the mirror, I didn't see danger. I saw history. I saw affection. I saw my mother's hand holding mine. I saw her eyes in the reflection. I saw the life we spent together making the house lighter, fuller, more alive. My fingers slid along the frame, and I remembered the rough texture, each scratch, each detail. It seemed impossible that something so important to me could cause so much fear in a stranger. Before that day, the Eat Your mirror represented love, memories, continuity. It was the only object I would never have the courage to sell, donate, or trade. It was part of my identity, part of the roots I never wanted to cut. And because of all that, it never crossed my mind that there was something hidden inside, something my mother never told me, something that was kept behind that heavy frame, waiting for the right or wrong moment to be revealed. When I think about the sentimental importance of that mirror, I realize it was much more than an heirloom. It was a kind of time capsule, a silent record of my family's pains, secrets, and glories. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what that object still held. Because despite all the nostalgia, despite all the love, there was a hidden truth there, a truth that would change everything. I always believed I knew my daughter, Every expression, every mood swing, every silent sigh that betrayed when something was wrong. A mother senses, even when she doesn't see, even when she doesn't know exactly what. And so, when she started acting strangely in recent weeks, I felt a growing discomfort in my chest. It wasn't something immediately obvious. It wasn't a sudden outburst, a tantrum, abrupt behavior. It was more like small cracks that, together, began to compromise the entire structure of our routine. The first time I found it strange was on an ordinary morning. I was in the living room, arranging some cushions, when I heard light footsteps, slowly entering. When I turned, I saw my daughter standing in front of the living room mirror, our family mirror, observing her own image with a look I had never seen in her before. It wasn't vanity. It wasn't distraction. It was analysis, as if she were studying something, searching for something. She approached, tilted her face, ran her fingers along the frame, and then took a step back, as if mentally measuring the size. Then she took her cell phone and took a picture, not of herself, but of the entire mirror. At that moment, something inside me tightened. She never cared about that mirror, never valued it. In fact, she always thought it was too old-fashioned, something Grandma would have, as she used to say when she was a teenager. So why was she observing it with such interest now? Why that calculated look? I asked, half jokingly, half seriously. Are you planning to redecorate your house? She looked away immediately, as if I had caught her doing something wrong. She answered too, quickly with a tense smile that didn't suit her face. No, Mom, just nothing much. And he left the room as if fleeing an inconvenient confession. After that day, things only got worse. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night to get a drink of water and find light in the hallway. It was her, silently, taking pictures of the mirror from different angles, using her cell phone flashlight to illuminate the frame, zooming in on her face as if she were looking for some mark, some hidden detail. When she realized I was awake, she would quickly turn everything off and make up some excuse, always improbable, always forced. I was just looking for something for my course. I was just testing the camera. I was just bored. I knew his voice better than I knew my own. And that wasn't the voice of someone telling the truth. As the days went by, the changes became even more evident. She started avoiding sitting near me. She avoided long conversations. She avoided looking me in the eye. It seemed she carried an enormous weight inside, a secret she feared I would discover. Sometimes I would see her on the phone speaking softly, as if she were negotiating something. Other times, I would find tabs open on her computer with pages from antique shops, websites selling old items, conversations with people who clearly weren't part of her social circle. My heart tightened more and more. It wasn't just curiosity. It was worry, a deep mother's worry, knowing something is wrong, but not knowing where to touch without causing harm. The sensation was like walking on glass. Everything seemed fragile, delicate, ready to break at the slightest movement. I started paying closer attention. And that's when I noticed an even more unsettling change. She stopped hugging me. She stopped talking about work, about her friends, about her plans. It was as if she was slowly disconnecting from me, creating an emotional distance that hurt more than any argument could. Sometimes I would walk past her bedroom door and hear her crying softly. Other times, I noticed that she had left home earlier than usual, or arrived much later. The questions kept piling up inside me, but whenever I tried to talk, she cut the conversation short with a coldness that didn't match her nature. She had always been sweet, kind, sensitive. She had always had difficulty hiding her emotions. And now she acted like someone trained to lie, or someone desperately trying to hide something that deeply shamed her. The mirror became the center of this mystery. I noticed when she passed by it quickly and stopped for a second, looking back as if checking if anything had changed. Sometimes, when she didn't know I was nearby, I saw her touch the frame as if searching for a secret entrance. Other times, she would wipe it with a cloth for no reason at all, observing how the reflection behaved under the light. That wasn't normal. It was an obsession. And the stranger she became, the more emotionally unstable she seemed. There were days when she was agitated, nervous, as if she'd drunk too much coffee. On others, she was silent and distant, as if she'd given up on something she never confessed. And every time I tried to ask what was wrong, she would answer, "Mom, it's nothing. Leave me alone." That phrase hurt, because "it's nothing" is never accompanied by red eyes and trembling hands, because "leave me alone" only comes from the mouth of someone who is losing themselves inside. The worry grew so much that it started keeping me awake at night. I found myself waking up at 3 in the morning, thinking about everything that could be behind that behavior. Was it a financial problem? Someone threatening her? Depression? Fear? Debt? Someone manipulating her? My mind wouldn't stop racing. Her emotional instability overflowed throughout the entire house. The walls seemed to absorb her tension, and the mirror, always the mirror, seemed to observe everything in silence, as if it knew more than I did, as if it were keeping a secret that I wasn't yet allowed to discover. And amidst all of this, a truth began to emerge in my thoughts. My daughter was having a crisis, and that crisis had somehow started with that mirror. At that time, I still didn't know she was thinking of selling it. I didn't know about the secret conversations, the risky plans, the impulsive decisions. I only knew that I was losing my daughter to something I couldn't see, and that, for a mother, is a pain impossible to describe. The mirror was becoming a point of tension, a strange magnet that drew her closer and closer. And while I tried to understand what was happening, she distanced herself further, plunging into a secret that would soon explode in our house in the most devastating way possible. I always believed that despite all the challenges, my daughter would never cross certain boundaries. There are silent boundaries within a family, lines that everyone knows cannot be crossed. And between her and me, the mirror has always been one of those lines. Not because it's a valuable object in terms of money, but because it's valuable in terms of history. Because it's the only thing I've always insisted on preserving. So when I found out it was advertised online, it was like being stabbed in the back. The discovery happened by chance, on an ordinary afternoon. I was looking at an ad for used appliances, nothing special, when I came across a page selling antiques. I can't say why I clicked. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was destiny. Maybe it was simply accumulated pain trying to find its way. But when the page opened, my heart froze. The image was there, the mirror of my family, the frame, the characteristic reflex. The markings on the wood are ones I would recognize even with my eyes closed. And above the photo, in large letters, antique mirror, a rarity, price negotiable, offers accepted. For a moment, my body refused to accept reality. My eyes blinked rapidly, as if the image would disappear if I blinked hard enough. But it didn't disappear. It was real. My mirror. My mirror. The piece that represented my mother, my grandmother, my history, being offered to the first stranger who had the money to buy it. I don't know how long I stared at that screen. My fingers trembled. The air felt trapped in my chest. The feeling was one of betrayal. But not only that, it was as if my entire past was being sold behind my back, as if I were losing something I could never get back. When I finally managed to move, I called my daughter. My voice came out weak, almost soundless, as if I had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. Come here, now. She appeared in the doorway, phone in hand, tossing her hair back in that automatic way she always does when she's anxious. I turned my computer screen towards her. I didn't say anything. I just let the image speak for me. Her face changed instantly. If there had been tension before, now there was fear. A fear she tried to hide, but which overflowed nonetheless. She took a deep breath and crossed her arms, as if trying to build an invisible barrier between us. But that barrier couldn't stop the truth. I saw it in her eyes. She knew exactly what I had found. Why is this online? I asked in the calmest voice I could manage, despite the storm raging inside me. For a few seconds, she remained silent, a heavy silence, a silence that carried guilt, until finally he said, Mom, it's just an old mirror. You don't even use it. The ow. Words were like invisible slaps. It's just an old mirror. You don't even use it. Did she really believe that? Or was it just a hasty excuse to justify the unjustifiable? I didn't know, but I felt the pain rising in my chest in a way that took my breath away. That mirror belonged to your grandmother, I replied, trying to hold back tears. Her mother's before that. How could you have the nerve to put it up for sale without asking me? She rolled her eyes impatiently, as if I were the one. Exaggerating. Mom, you're being too dramatic. You know there's not room for everything here. And we need money, okay? You always say I should help more. Well, that's what I'm doing. That was hard to hear. She used my own words, distorted, manipulated, to justify something unjustifiable. Pain mingled with indignation. I tried to take a deep breath, but each attempt felt like it was tearing my chest apart. It wasn't about the object itself. It was about trust, about respect, about worth. You needed to talk to me. This isn't just an object. You don't sell stories like this. She shrugged. History doesn't pay the bills, Mom. The phrase echoed in the room like a final blow. I felt my legs weaken. I wanted to scream, to ask where I went wrong, at what point she started seeing the world in such a cold way. But I stood there, trying to hold back my own pain so it wouldn't turn into anger. My daughter kept looking at me, trying to appear firm, but I could see the insecurity behind that defensive air. She knew she had made a mistake. Maybe she had acted impulsively. Maybe she was desperate for some reason I didn't yet know. But nothing, absolutely nothing justified doing it in secret. I took a deep breath. Who else saw this ad? She looked away, and that's when I realized the magnitude of the problem. She not only announced it, she had already spoken with buyers, negotiated, photos sent, scheduled times. Everything was arranged without my knowledge. The mirror wasn't just for sale. He was about to leave my house. And the worst part? I had no idea who would show up to see it. I didn't know who already knew about it. I didn't know that simple announcement, a click on a photo, a post on some website, would open the doors to something much bigger and much more dangerous than any of us imagined. As my daughter nervously clutched her phone, I sensed there was more to that advertisement than she was admitting. More than money, more than impulse. There were secrets. There was fear. There was something she didn't want to say. I didn't know it yet, but her attempt to sell the mirror would be the start of a storm that would change our lives forever. The morning began like any other, but there was something in the air that I couldn't explain. A strange, heavy silence, as if the whole house were holding its breath. My daughter woke up too early, walked around the house with short, quick steps, as if trying not to make a sound, but at the same time unable to stay. Still, I watched her from afar, realizing that something was about to happen, something she didn't want me to see. The atmosphere was different. Even the air seemed thicker. My intuition, that silent voice that always warns me when something is about to go wrong, was restless. And I spent the whole morning trying to ignore that feeling, keeping myself busy with simple tasks, as if that could silence the discomfort inside me. But the truth is, when a mother senses something, no silence can hide. It, nor wall can disguise it. Shortly after lunch, I heard a noise at the front door. Doors opening slowly, restrained footsteps, whispered words. I found it strange, because my daughter didn't usually receive visitors without letting me know. And even when she did, she never got so nervous hearing someone arrive. I decided to go downstairs to see what was happening. The banister was icy under my hands, as if the house itself was apprehensive. When I reached the last step, my heart almost stopped. An unknown man stood in the middle of the room. He was neither young nor old, perhaps in his 40s or 50s, and dressed discreetly, almost too formally for a casual meeting. He was bent over the mirror, examining every detail of the frame, the glass, the back, as if he were an expert, not an ordinary buyer. But what caught my attention most were the gloves, black gloves, of fine leather, like those worn by restorers or investigators. And right there, in that instant, everything inside me screamed that something was terribly wrong. He ran his gloved fingers over the surface of the mirror with excessive care, almost reverence. His breathing was steady, but there was tension in every movement. His shoulders were rigid, his posture alert, and his eyes. His eyes lacked the curiosity of an ordinary shopper. There was recognition, as if he were standing before something he had been searching for a long time. I approached slowly, not understanding anything. Good. Afternoon. Can I help you? My voice came out hesitantly, trying to hide my unease. My daughter turned around so quickly it looked like she'd been startled. Mom, I was going to call you. This is the buyer. She didn't give his name, and the man didn't extend his hand. He just looked at me, with a deep, uncomfortable look, as if he were trying to gauge whether I knew what he knew. That chilled me to the bone. My daughter, nervous, kept running her hand through her hair. A tic. She'd had since childhood whenever she lied or hid something. The man said nothing. He merely examined the mirror as if it were a dangerous object, as if every inch needed to be checked. He tilted his head to look at the top, brought his face too close, then took 2 steps back with an expression I couldn't interpret. Fear? Surprise? Confirmation? I watched everything in silence, trying to understand. Why was he wearing gloves to touch a mirror? Why hadn't anyone told me he was coming? Why did my daughter seem more tense than he was? It felt like I was watching an act from a play I wasn't a part of, but which, suddenly, was about me. Where did you find this? He asked my daughter without taking his eyes off the mirror. My daughter froze. Me. Right here. It's my mother's. It's from our family. The man finally looked me in the eyes. How many generations? The question came out dry, direct, as if it were crucial. as if the answer could change the course of the conversation. At least 3, I replied. Why? He didn't answer immediately. He just took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for something. Then he brought his face closer to the mirror again, almost pressing his nose against the glass, trying to see details I'd never noticed before. He shone the flashlight of a small device, which he discreetly pulled from his pocket, along the frame. The flashlight revealed that he was searching for something specific. A brand, a symbol, a scar on the wood, a secret. My mouth felt dry. That man wasn't there to buy a decorative mirror. He was there because he knew something none of us knew. He knew something my mother never told me, something I never imagined existed. And my daughter, innocent or reckless, had handed that piece over to someone who treated it as if it were evidence from an old case, an artifact of historical value, or worse, part of an unsolved mystery. The tension in the room was suffocating. The air seemed heavier with each passing minute. My daughter bit her lower lip anxiously, watching the man's every move as if she were afraid he would say something she didn't want to hear. I needed to ask. I needed to understand. Are you looking for something in particular? He turned slightly, without taking his eyes off the mirror completely. You didn't understand anything strange over the years? My mind immediately filled with memories. The reflex that sometimes seemed to take a second to follow, the inexplicable shadows, the unusual weight of the frame, the characteristic smell of wood, the stories my mother told carefully, avoiding certain details I swallowed hard. Why the question? The man took a deep breath, running his gloved hand over his chin. Because this mirror is not just a mirror. The phrase hung in the air, cutting through the silence like a knife. My daughter clutched the cell phone tightly in her hands. I felt my legs go weak, and at that exact moment, I realized that what was about to happen in that room would change everything. Every memory, every recollection, every belief I had about that object. The storm was only beginning. Up until that moment, however uncomfortable I felt, there was still a part of me trying to believe that it was just an exaggeration of my imagination. A strange buyer, a little more careful than usual, a nervous daughter. Maybe I was just putting together pieces that didn't fit. Maybe it was just a common sale of an old object that meant a lot to me, but nothing to anyone else. But everything changed when he took that flashlight out of his pocket. He picked it up with almost ritualistic care. It was small, compact, with a strong, precise light. Unlike the common flashlights we use at home. He clicked the button and a beam of white light cut through the room, directly illuminating the mirror frame. That simple gesture made the atmosphere in the room even more tense. My daughter immediately stiffened, as if she knew this was the crucial moment. The light traced the wood slowly, as if probing secrets. He brought his face close to the mirror, so close that for a moment his reflection blended with that of anyone who had ever stood there before. But the way he looked, it wasn't like admiring an antique piece. There was no fascination, no enchantment. There was analysis. There was calculation. There was contained fear. He tilted the light to the side of the frame, then to the top, then to the bottom corner where the wood was darkest. With age, every millimeter seemed important. I watched in silence, my heart racing, feeling as if I were witnessing a scene that, somehow, was no longer part of my own life. It was as if I were an intruder in my own home. Is something wrong? I asked, trying to sound calm, but my voice trembled at the end. He didn't answer, at least not immediately. Instead, he turned off the flashlight for a second, took a deep breath as if organizing his thoughts, and then turned it back on. This time, he directed the beam toward the back of the frame. That's when he did something that caught my attention even more. He tilted the mirror slightly forward, very carefully, and ran his gloved hand along the back. His fingers seemed to be searching for a specific point, a protrusion, a small crack, anything that wasn't visible to the naked eye. My heart raced. I had never seen anyone touch that mirror like that. Not even the men who brought it when it arrived at my house years ago had been so meticulous. As he touched the bottom of the frame, my daughter seemed to shrink into the corner of the room. Her hands gripped the phone so tightly that her fingers were turning white. I noticed she was breathing rapidly, a mixture of anxiety and fear. And this only increased the feeling that something serious was about to happen. Suddenly, the man stopped, the flashlight fixed on a single point at the bottom of the mirror. He brought his face even closer, almost pressing his eyes against that detail that only he seemed to see. The silence in the room became unbearable. I could feel my pulse in my neck, my hands, my ears. The house, which had once been a place of memories, now seemed like a scene from an investigation. Then it happened. Without any warning, he took 2 abrupt steps backward. The reaction was so unexpected that I was startled myself. I almost screamed. He recoiled like someone who had touched something dangerous, as if he had received an invisible shock. His eyes were wide, his breathing heavier, his posture tense. It was the kind of reaction someone has when their worst fear is confirmed. My daughter gasped softly. I saw panic fully settle on her face. "Young man, what happened?" I asked, startled. "Did something happen? Is the mirror broken? Is there a problem?" He didn't answer immediately. He gripped the flashlight tightly, as if trying to decide what to say, as if weighing the consequences. His silence was worse than any bad news I could have received. When he finally spoke, the words came out firm, full of gravity, like a sentence. "Don't touch that anymore. This is serious." The sentence shot across the room like a bolt of lightning. My first impulse was to deny it. "Serious? How can it be serious? It's just an old mirror. What could be so serious about that?" He looked me in the eyes. There was no arrogance, no desire to intimidate. There was seriousness. A type of seriousness I recognize because I've seen it in doctors giving diagnoses, in lawyers reading sentences, in people who know more than they can say at once. "This mirror isn't just a mirror," he repeated once more, now in a slightly lower voice. "I need you to move away from it. And you too." He pointed at my daughter. My daughter took a step back immediately, as if pushed by an invisible force. I remained where I was, between the mirror and the man, trying to maintain some control over the situation, even without understanding anything. "You're scaring me," I said. "What did you find? Is anything broken? Is there some, I don't know, animal trapped in there? What's so serious about it?" He looked away for a moment, as if calculating how many words he could use. He ran his gloved hand across his forehead thoughtfully. "I can't say for sure right now, but I saw something that shouldn't have been there, at least not inside a regular mirror." The word inside stuck in my mind. Within, inside the mirror. My memories began to blur. My mother saying that mirror was valuable. The stories about the old family home. The times I thought I saw something strange in the reflection. The days I felt watched as I passed by it. "What do you mean inside?" I insisted. He took a deep breath. "There's something hidden in the structure. It's not just a simple old frame. And, as far as I know, mirrors like this have been used before, in other situations. Situations involving investigations, evidence, and things that are usually of interest to the police." Sainda. World turned. Evidence, investigation, police. I looked at my daughter, who was now completely pale. Her eyes shone with fear. She tried to say something, but her voice failed her. I just wanted to sell. I didn't know there was anything special about it," she murmured, almost silently. I felt a devastating mix of emotions. Sadness at seeing her in that state, anger at her recklessness, guilt for not noticing sooner, fear of what was to come, and above all, a strange feeling that mirror, which I had always associated with memories of my family, now carried a weight that surpassed anything I could have imagined. The buyer moved a little closer, but maintained a respectful distance from the mirror. "Look, I can't just pretend I didn't see this. And it would be irresponsible of me to take this item away as if it were a normal purchase. From what I'm seeing here, this may be linked to an old case. A very old one." "An old case?" I repeated, astonished. "What are you talking about? Crime? Fraud? What does this have to do with my family?" He took another deep breath, and that's when I realized the true weight of what he was carrying. "I work with pieces that sometimes appear in probate proceedings, complicated inheritances, judicial auctions, that sort of thing. I've seen some mirrors similar to this one, and when I saw the advertisement, I was suspicious. Now, seeing it up close, I can't ignore it. I need to do the right thing." The room seemed to shrink. The mirror, which had previously been just a part of my home's decor, was now the center of something I didn't understand, something involving the past, justice, hidden secrets, and it all started with a simple attempt by my daughter to sell an old mirror. At that moment, I still didn't know that he would pick up his cell phone, call someone, and that a few minutes later, our house would become the setting for a scene I never imagined I would live through. But when he took 2 steps back and said, "Don't touch that anymore. This is serious," I understood that there was no turning back, and that the mirror of my family was about to reveal something that had been hidden for decades. The man was still standing in front of the mirror, breathing heavily, when his hand went straight to his pocket. He pulled out his cell phone with the speed of someone who already knew exactly what he needed to do. He didn't hesitate. He didn't think twice. It was an automatic gesture. almost instinctive. The kind of movement you only make when the situation is truly serious. I stood there, paralyzed, watching the scene as if I were outside my own body. My daughter beside me gripped my arm tightly, as if she needed to hold on to something to keep from collapsing. Her touch said a lot: fear, regret, panic, but it also said something even more painful. She knew from the beginning that she was getting involved in something she didn't understand. The buyer swiped their finger across the phone screen, found a number already saved in their favorites, and pressed call. That detail alone made me shudder. It wasn't a manually dialed number. It wasn't an impromptu call. It was a direct, prepared contact, like someone who had dealt with similar cases before. He put the cell phone to his ear. "It's Martins. I need a team to come here. Urgently." His voice had changed. It was no longer the calm, tense voice he used with us. Now it was firm, professional, objective, the kind of voice one uses when accustomed to giving important reports. I approached involuntarily. "Young man, what's going on? Why are you calling the police?" He raised his hand, asking for silence. "Just a minute." That sentence cut me to the bone. The house, which had always been my safe haven, now seemed too small, too suffocating, full of shadows. I watched his every expression, trying to find some clue of what was to come. My daughter was so pale she looked like she was about to faint. She was trembling, and it wasn't just her hands. It was a tremor that took over her entire body. On the other end of the line, someone seemed to be answering too quickly. He confirmed our home address, and that sent a chill down my spine. When the police confirm the address without asking for details, it's because they're used to that kind of call. After giving the necessary information, the man hung up the phone with a heavy sigh, as if he were carrying on his shoulders a problem that didn't entirely belong to him, but that he was forced to face. He put his cell phone in his pocket, turned to us, and, for the first time, his face seemed even more serious than before. "They are on their way." The phrase echoed in the room. There was no emotion. There was no doubt. It was a cold certainty. I felt my heart race to an almost painful point. "Why? Why did you call the police? It's just a mirror. Please tell me what's going on." He took a deep breath, crossed his arms, and stared at the object as if trying to piece together a puzzle that was too old, too dangerous, too sensitive. "I need to confirm something before I explain." The answer came without hesitation, without beating around the bush, without details. That made me even more desperate. "Confirm what? You're making me nervous. Does this have anything to do with my family? With someone who used to live here? With the mirror being old? What did you see?" My voice rose without me realizing it. Fear was taking hold of me. It wasn't a simple fear. It was profound. A fear that arises when the truth is about to emerge, but refuses to reveal itself all at once. My daughter, her voice trembling, murmured, "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know it would turn into this." "Sorry doesn't solve anything right now," the buyer interrupted firmly, but not rudely. "If you had doubts, if you were afraid, you should have talked to your mother before trying to mess with this." She shrugged, as if shrinking in size, and I felt my heart break a little more. My daughter had made a terrible choice, but without understanding that the mirror carried something far beyond symbolism and memory. I stared back at the man. "Did you find anything inside the mirror? Behind it? What's so serious about it?" He approached but kept his distance from the frame, as if he truly believed that touching that object could trigger some consequence. I can't say for sure without the right team, but, from what I've seen, there seems to be something hidden in the structure. Something that shouldn't be there. Something I've only seen in cases involving missing or concealed evidence. The word hidden hit me like a hammer. Evidence hidden, inside the mirror of my family. Who hid the evidence? When? Why? My mind started racing in circles, trying to connect memories that didn't fit. My mother never mentioned anything suspicious. My grandmother always spoke fondly of the mirror. I never heard rumors of crimes, investigations, or secrets involving our family. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And yet, something was there. Something hidden. Something that made a professional man take 2 steps back the moment he saw it. I felt my throat close up. "So, what did you see? What exactly was at the bottom of the frame?" He shook his head, frustrated with his own caution. "I need the right lighting, the right instruments, and confirmation from the team. I can't risk saying anything wrong, but what I can say is that this isn't common. This type of mirror only appears on very specific lists, and it's usually linked to stories that families prefer to forget." My skin crawled. Stories that families prefer to forget. "Are you saying you have a secret hidden in that mirror?" He closed his eyes for a second. I'm saying there's a possibility. And if that possibility is real, you cannot, I repeat, you cannot, touch that object again until the police arrive. That killed me inside. A mirror that I touched for decades, that my mother played, that my grandmother played. A mirror that I cleaned, carried, moved around, placed flowers near, photographed, used to fix my hair. A mirror that I always felt held a story, but not this kind of story. Not a story involving fear, risk, crime, police. I felt my eyes burning. This can't be happening. My daughter started crying silently. I didn't know. I just wanted to sell. I thought I didn't have anything. The man turned to her with a less rigid, but still concerned look. I understand, but you unknowingly put something sensitive into circulation. If I hadn't seen that ad, it could have been someone who wouldn't have warned you. Someone who would have taken the mirror and left you without answers, and in danger without knowing it. That sentence made my blood run cold. In danger. That word never belonged in my living room. It never made sense alongside family memories. But now it did. And it did in a terrifying way. The buyer stepped back a little from the mirror, put the flashlight away again, and stood there like someone prepared for the worst and expecting the inevitable. They won't be long, he said, looking towards the door. I swallowed hard. The house was silent. My daughter was trembling. The buyer stared intently at the mirror, and I felt, deep in my soul, that what was hidden there was not just a secret. It was something much bigger, something that was about to emerge, something that the police would confirm in a few minutes, and that would change our lives forever. The minutes leading up to the police's arrival felt like an eternity. Each second was a heavy drop falling into a bucket already nearly full of tension. The house was too silent, a silence that was neither natural nor comfortable. It was a silence that carried the weight of the unknown, as if the walls knew that something terrible was about to be revealed. I couldn't stop looking at the mirror. The late afternoon light streamed through the window and reflected off the glass, creating patches of shimmer that seemed alive, pulsating. For a moment, I had the absurd feeling that the mirror was observing the entire room, absorbing everything, as if it were waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. My daughter stood near the door, hugging her own arms, trembling uncontrollably. The buyer, Martins, as he had introduced himself on the call, kept his distance from the mirror, his body rigid, alert, like a guard waiting for his shift to change. I paced back and forth, trying to breathe deeply, trying not to fall apart. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared my heart for what was to come. Then, finally, the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the house like a snap of reality. My chest tightened. My daughter almost let out a scream. Martins walked to the door and opened it with a quick gesture, as if he had been expecting it for a long time. 2 uniformed police officers entered, followed by a third person, a man with light-colored gloves and a large briefcase. All 3 had serious, focused expressions, typical of those called in for something that cannot be treated as routine. The first policeman, a tall man with a stern expression, gave a brief nod. "Good afternoon. We received a call regarding a potentially compromised item." The word compromised hammered in my ears. It wasn't damaged. It wasn't suspect. It was compromised. Something that could hurt, incriminate, reveal. Martins immediately pointed to the mirror. "This is the one." The police officers approached cautiously. It wasn't a typical approach. It wasn't the curiosity of someone examining an antique piece. It was the demeanor of professionals who might be dealing with something related to a crime. One of them walked completely around the object, assessing not only the mirror, but also the surroundings. The third man, the one with the briefcase, placed the equipment on the ground and carefully opened it. I watched everything with the same feeling one would have when observing a hurricane. Slowly approaching. Fear, helplessness, disbelief. The police officer, who appeared to be the leader, tilted his head to look closely in the mirror. "He's old, very old," he commented, almost in a diagnostic tone. "3 generations in the family," I replied, feeling my voice falter. At that moment, he observed me as if analyzing not only the object, but also the family's emotional relationship with it. I saw understanding in his eyes, and also concern. It was as if that mirror were a central piece of something larger and perhaps dangerous. The man in the briefcase put on gloves and took out a small ultraviolet light device. When he turned it on, the entire room seemed to change atmosphere. The cold purple light illuminated the frame, revealing details I had never seen before. Tiny scratches, unique marks, designs almost invisible to the naked eye. as if ancient secrets were finally emerging from the darkness. My daughter swallowed hard, her body trembling. Mom, I didn't want this. I didn't know you were going to call the police. I didn't know there was anything there. I touched her arm gently, but my touch was as cold as hers. Shh, not now. Let's wait. But the truth is, I was trembling inside too. The second police officer, a serious-looking woman, picked up a traditional flashlight and began illuminating the back of the frame, slowly passing the beam of light, centimeter by centimeter. She seemed to be searching for a pattern. Then she asked, "Could you carefully move the mirror away from the wall?" Martins helped, placing his hand only on the base, avoiding touching the frame. As they moved the mirror away, the sound of the wood scraping on the floor made my stomach churn. When the mirror was tilted, exposed from behind, the specialist, the one with the briefcase, approached. He shone the UV flashlight again, this time on the back. The light revealed something that made my heart race. Tiny dots, like dark spots, aligned almost symmetrically on the wood. They looked like marks, stamps, symbols. I couldn't tell. The policewoman whispered, "Here, look at this." Martins took a step back. I said, "It's the same pattern." The word standard left me even more confused. Standard of what? Whose standard is it? What pattern is it related to? The team leader moved his face closer, but didn't touch. This isn't ordinary wear and tear. These are identifying marks. Identification of what? I asked, my voice almost failing. I was shaking. I was literally shaking. He took a deep breath before answering. And that detail, that slight delay, already said a lot. Some very old objects, used to store documents or confidential items, were marked in this way, especially in times when hiding meant surviving. I felt my legs go weak. Classified documents, hidden items, identification markings. It was too much. My daughter began to cry softly, her breathing rapid, her face red. The policewoman placed her hand on her shoulder and spoke calmly. "Don't worry, you did the right thing by calling us." But we hadn't called anyone. The person who had called was a buyer who wasn't even part of the family. The shame and weight of it crushed my chest. My daughter covered her face with both hands, sobbing. "I just wanted to sell. I just wanted to pay my bills. I didn't know that was there." I wanted to hug her, but my arms were too heavy, as if every word spoken by the police officers increased the weight on me. The expert tilted the flashlight again, and this time something glistened in the wood. A small piece of metal, thin as a blade, embedded in the structure. The police officer straightened up, tense. "That's it. We found it." "What did they find?" I asked, my voice already hoarse. He stared at me for a long second. Something that shouldn't be there. Something serious. The silence that followed that sentence was suffocating. None of us breathed properly. I felt my hands grow cold, my eyes welling up with tears. A sharp tightness gripped my chest. I knew, at that moment, that something was very wrong. Completely wrong. Wrong in a way that surpassed everything I'd ever experienced. And that mirror, that piece of my family's memory, held a secret that should never have been discovered so abruptly. And now, nothing would be normal again. I always thought I knew that mirror inside and out. Every scratch, every scuff, every corner of the frame. I had wiped it down, hung it on the wall, seen reflections of every phase of my life there. But that day, I discovered I had never truly known what it hid. When the specialist found that small metallic glint on the back, the atmosphere in the room changed again. It was no longer just a suspicion. It wasn't just intuition. There was something concrete there, something real, something that, until then, had remained hidden in the shadows of the wood for decades. The lead officer looked at the specialist and gave a slight nod. They didn't need to exchange many words. It seemed as if they had both been involved in similar scenes before. But to me, it was all completely surreal. I watched, motionless, my fingers interlaced, trying to control the trembling that seemed to rise from the ground through my bones. "We will open it carefully," the expert said, "without damaging the original structure more than necessary." He took some fine tools from the case, a small wrench, a kind of spatula, delicate pliers. It was almost a surgical procedure. He positioned himself, behind the mirror, which was now slightly tilted, carefully supported so it wouldn't tip over. The light from the UV flashlight and a second regular flashlight illuminated the back, revealing the pattern of the old wood and that almost imperceptible cutout, which I had never noticed before. "This isn't just finishing," he explained. "It's a lid. It was made to look like part of the piece, but it's not. A lid. inside the mirror. My heart raced. He fitted the tool into a small gap and began to carefully force it out, millimeter by millimeter. The sound of the wood creaking, slowly loosening, echoed through the room like a groan from the past itself, resisting being opened. I held my breath. My daughter was holding my hand now, and I could feel her sweaty, cold palm. Suddenly, with a dry snap, the lid came loose. For a moment, nobody moved. The specialist held the piece of wood that had been removed, turned it slightly to keep it supported, and then we all saw. Something slipped out of the hidden cavity and fell to the floor with a soft, almost fragile sound. An envelope. Old. Yellowed with age. Sealed. The team leader stepped forward. The policewoman also approached. Martins held his breath. I felt my legs weaken. The envelope seemed so simple, plain paper, no embellishments, but at that moment, it was as if it shone in the middle of the room. It carried an enormous weight, a weight of years, a weight of silence. My God, I whispered, without even realizing I had spoken, aloud. The policewoman carefully picked up the envelope, wearing gloves, and turned it over so we could all see the front. There was old writing, in pen, partially erased by time. Only parts were recognizable. A name, a date, and in the corner, something that looked like a word, complaint. The leader spoke in a low, almost grave tone. This is exactly the kind of thing we feared finding. A complaint? I repeated, as if the word had no meaning in my reality. A complaint about what? About whom? He looked at me with a mixture of caution and humanity. That's what we're going to find out now. The policewoman placed the envelope on a clean surface, a small board the specialist had taken from his briefcase, and with extreme care, began to open it. The seal gave way with a dry, fragile sound, as if it were being broken for the first time in decades. And perhaps it was. Perhaps that envelope had been hidden in that frame even before I was born, even before my mother was an adult, even before our family knew they were carrying a secret inside a mirror. When the flap was opened, the smell of old paper filled the air. That odor of archives, of forgotten drawers, of a compressed past. The policewoman tilted the envelope and let the contents slide out slowly. 3 things fell upon the board. Some folded documents, 2 black and white photos, and a handwritten letter, folded into several parts. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my ribs. My daughter squeezed my hand tighter and tighter. Martin stood there, his eyes fixed on the photos. The specialist stepped back a little, making room for the police officers. "Let's take it one step at a time," said the leader. The policewoman picked up the photos first. They were old photos, clearly taken decades ago. The first showed a large house with an old facade, a front garden, and a long porch. The second showed 3 men standing in front of a table, with stacks of papers and an open suitcase. The mood of the photo was heavy, serious. I approached a little with their permission, and my heart almost stopped. I recognized that facade, perhaps not perfectly, but enough to feel the impact. It was my family's old house, the one my mother always mentioned when telling stories of her childhood. The house I never got to know personally because it was sold before I was born. "That house," I said, my voice breaking. "It belonged to my family. My mother lived there." The police officers exchanged a quick glance. The leader then picked up the documents. He unfolded them carefully. Some were faded, but still legible. There were signatures, seals, stamps. They looked like copies of records, contracts, reports. I didn't understand everything that was written, but some words stood out like knives. Fraud, misappropriation of funds, witness intimidation, inventory change. My stomach churned. "What is this about?" I managed to ask. He took a deep breath. "It appears to be material linked to a financial crime case, and perhaps something even more serious. But the key piece of evidence will be this letter." The policewoman picked up the folded letter and began to unfold it delicately, as if handling something sacred. The paper was fragile, almost brittle. The handwriting was firm, slanted, with the strokes of someone writing with conviction. There was a name at the top, probably the recipient, and just below, the first lines. She began reading softly, just for the police officers and the buyer. But, in a short time, the atmosphere became so tense that the leader decided to read more audibly, though not too loudly. "I, partially illegible name, declare upon my conscience that I cannot remain silent in the face of what I have witnessed." I felt a shiver run down my spine. For years I have witnessed schemes involving fraud, manipulation of wills, alteration of documents, and threats directed at rightful heirs, all orchestrated by name, again partially redacted, using this house and family assets as a front. I put my hand to my mouth. Legitimate heirs, fraud, manipulation of wills. This seemed like a direct accusation, a formal complaint. But why was it hidden inside the mirror of my family? The leader continued reading excerpts, skipping over illegible parts. I keep copies of documents and evidence that confirm the use of forged wills, forged signatures, and concealment of assets. I fear for my life, because I know that if they find out I intend to hand this over to the authorities, I may not have another chance. Therefore, I hide this letter and the copies of the documents in one of the few places I still consider safe, behind the mirror that has remained in this house for generations. I felt my world crumble. He was talking about the mirror, from my mother's mirror, from my grandmother's mirror. On paper, he continued, "If you are reading this, it's because time has passed, but the truth has found a way. Perhaps I will no longer be alive to see justice done, but at least may the truth not die with me." When the police officer finished reading, the silence that fell over the room was dense, almost physical. I felt as if I could touch him. I was stunned. My family, connected to this? The mirror, used as a hiding place? Someone, at some point, decided that the only way to try to expose a crime was to hide the evidence inside an object that seemed banal, but which, in reality, carried a silent cry for justice. My eyes filled with tears. "Are you saying that my ancestors were involved in this?" I asked, with difficulty. The leader responded cautiously, "We can't say for sure yet. This letter may have been written by someone from inside, or by someone who frequented the house. It could have been a relative, an employee, an acquaintance. What we do know is that this person trusted the mirror as a hiding place, and that, in itself, is significant." I looked in the mirror again. He remained there, motionless, silent, almost ironic, decades reflecting faces, emotions, moments, while literally hiding a crime. I felt a mixture of pain, shame, shock, and, strangely, relief. Relief at finally understanding why that mirror always carried a strange feeling, as if it had too much history, too heavy. At that moment, I knew. From that day forward, the mirror would never again be just a mirror. He had become proof, witness, a gateway to a truth buried for decades. And me. I was at the center of all of this, without being asked, without having chosen. But now, there's no going back. When the letter ended, when the last word echoed in the silent room, I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. It was as if an invisible force had pulled me back in time, tearing away the veil that had covered secrets kept for decades. Secrets I never imagined were connected to my own family. I still looked at the mirror as if it had transformed into something entirely different, and, in a way, it had. It was no longer a simple antique object inherited with affection. It was a silent witness to a sordid past, a portal to stories that were hidden, erased, stifled. Stories I would never have discovered if my daughter hadn't impulsively tried to sell it. The team leader turned to me, keeping his voice calm but firm. "I know this might be a shock, but we need to talk honestly." I swallowed hard. I was afraid of the next sentence. He continued. "The letter mentions names. Some are blurred, but others are legible, including a last name that matches yours." I felt my stomach drop. "What's your last name?" I asked, even though I was afraid of the answer. He brought the envelope closer and showed it to me, shining the flashlight on it. The writing was old, but still decipherable. My family's last name was there, in the first version of the letter. The name of one of my relatives, someone I knew when I was a girl, appeared as one of the people involved in that old fraud. My heart ached, with an indescribable pain. It was like losing someone for the second time. I immediately remembered the stories my mother and grandmother told me, always full of pauses, uncomfortable silences, and strange expressions when certain names were mentioned. They never spoke clearly, but I sensed that there were old wounds there, wounds that were now finally showing their scars. The police officer explained in more detail. "This letter mentions a relative of yours, someone who participated in a very serious asset fraud, perhaps even more than that. From the description, there may have been embezzlement, falsification of documents, and even coercion." Coercion. The word hit me like a hammer. Coercion? My God! He threatened someone? It's possible. We don't have all the pages, but the documents found together reinforce this hypothesis. The air felt impossible to breathe. My daughter, still trembling, clung to my arm, trying to support me, but she herself could barely hold herself up. And I was trying to understand how that horror could be connected to my roots. The expert approached and added, "This mirror wasn't just a mirror. It was part of a set of pieces specifically designed to hide documents, money, or small objects. It was a common technique used by people who wanted to conceal evidence or even valuables from other family members, or from the authorities." My eyes widened. "Set? What set?" "That's right," he said. "It's not just the mirror. Over the years, we've found other similar items. Furniture with secret compartments, double frames, hollow chairs. These were objects produced by artisans who worked for wealthy or influential families, and were often used to hide what couldn't be exposed. Some of these objects were traced by the police in old investigations." I felt a chill run through my body. You were looking for this mirror?" I asked, still shocked. The leader nodded. "We've been tracking some items from this collection for many years. Some have appeared at auctions. Others were found in old residences. Each time one surfaces, it's usually linked to some unsolved case from the past. And, did you know this one was here? We knew that a mirror from that collection hadn't appeared yet, but we didn't know where it was until her daughter's announcement was posted. This information hit me like a punch." "So, that's why you came so quickly?" I asked, looking at Martins, the buyer. He nodded affirmatively, his gaze filled with concern. When I saw the photos in the ad, I was immediately suspicious. I had seen objects with similar markings before, and when I got here and found the patterns on the frame, I knew I needed to call the police right away. I put my hand to my chest, trying to control the lump that was forming in my throat. My family, the family I had always considered honorable, traditional, simple, and hardworking, had hidden something so terrible? Who was that relative? Why has no one ever talked about this? What else did they hide? The policewoman then tried to reassure me, even though her voice was as heavy as my soul at that moment. "Understand, this doesn't mean your entire family was involved. Often, it only takes one person to drag an entire lineage into a shadow that no one chose." Those words were like an unexpected hug, painful, but necessary. Still, my heart was heavy, very heavy. I remembered old conversations, from the glances exchanged between my mother and grandmother, when the name of that relative came up casually, of photographs that have disappeared, of stories interrupted with, "Ah, never mind, that's in the past." Perhaps the past that my family tried to bury was there, literally hidden inside the mirror. The police officer continued explaining. The mirror was part of a set of objects used to hide important documents, some legal, others not. In the case of his family, everything indicates that the mirror served to conceal evidence that should have been handed over to the authorities. The ground seemed to spin. I felt ashamed. I felt pain. I felt anger. Not at my daughter, not at the police, but at a past that never belonged to me, but was now crashing down on my shoulders like an avalanche. Martins added in a low voice. "And most importantly, this mirror probably remained in the original house until it was sold. Then someone decided it was safer to take the hiding place with them to prevent the evidence from being discovered." My mind began to piece together the puzzle, piece by piece, memory by memory. My mother never got rid of the mirror. She always insisted on bringing him along when she moved. She treated him with excessive care, as if he were something too fragile, or too valuable, or too dangerous. I understood the meaning of this for the first time. Perhaps she knew, not everything, but something. Something that made her keep the mirror as if it were a final memory, or a final truth. Tears streamed down my face. Before I could stop them, my daughter hugged me, crying with guilt, but I held her tight. She made mistakes, yes, but she didn't create the past. It simply opened a door that had been locked for decades. And now, there was no way to close it anymore. The police collected everything, the photos, the documents, the letter, and carefully cataloged it. The mirror was isolated as an important piece of research material. The team was serious, meticulous, almost in reverence for the story that had just emerged from the shadows. Before leaving, the team leader looked at me and said, "I know this is difficult, but the truth always finds a way to come out, and sometimes it chooses the most unexpected moment." I took a deep breath, trying to absorb every word. That mirror, which I had always seen as a memento, now represented the side of my family that no one had dared to tell, a side forcibly hidden, guarded behind wood and glass, finally revealed by the hand of fate. And at that moment, I knew. My family's story wasn't exactly what I was told, and the truth is, The truth was never reflected in the mirror. She was always hiding behind him. When the door closed behind the police officers and the expert, the house was plunged into an eerie silence. It was no longer the tense silence of before the revelation. It was a heavy silence, full of consequences, as if every piece of furniture, every wall, every corner was trying to process everything along with me. The mirror was no longer at our disposal. It was now part of an inquiry, an investigation, a past that decided to return without asking permission. My daughter and I were alone in the room. Martins had already left after providing the necessary information. The house seemed larger, emptier, and at the same time, more suffocating. I felt as if the air had thickened. The absence of the mirror on the wall left a physical void, a lighter rectangle in the paint, marking the place where it had always been. It was almost an open scar. I sat down slowly on the sofa, because if I didn't sit, I was sure my legs would give way. My daughter remained standing for a few seconds, motionless in the middle of the room, not knowing where to look, where to go, what to do with her own hands. She seemed smaller, fragile, shrunken inside. For a while, none of us said anything, until finally, I broke the silence. Now you're going to tell me the truth, the whole truth. My voice didn't come out loud, it wasn't a shout, but it came out firm. It was the voice of a tired, wounded mother, but one who still needed to understand. She needed to put the pieces back together, however painful it might be. She swallowed hard, her eyes filled with tears, and came to the armchair opposite me. She sat on the edge, as if ready to get up and run away at any moment. He looked at his own hands, avoiding my eyes. I'm so sorry, Mom, she began, her voice breaking. I never, ever thought all of this would happen. Why did you do that? I asked. Why did you place the ad? Why did you try to sell the mirror of all things? The mirror, without telling me anything? She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling as if she were trying to draw courage from the air. I was desperate, she said. I owe someone, Mom. The word debt pierced me like a cut. What debt? I asked, feeling a mixture of worry, fear, and irritation growing inside me. You never mentioned any debt to me. She ran her hands over her face, nervously. I thought I could handle it on my own. I didn't want to worry you. I took out a loan, used a credit card, interest on top of interest. When I realized it, I was already in a hole. I owed more than I could pay. They were pressuring me, calling me all the time, saying they were going to block my name, that I was going to lose my car, that they could take legal action. I was scared, very scared. And then, she paused for far too long. I watched her, my heart torn between wanting to hug her and wanting to shake her. And then I started looking at everything in the house with different eyes, she continued. What could be sold? What had some value? I knew you were attached to the mirror, but I also knew it was old, that maybe it had some antique value. I thought, if I sold it quickly, I could at least solve the most urgent part of the debt. Then I could explain it to you or, I don't know, come up with another excuse. She lowered her head, ashamed. You were going to hide all of this from me? I asked, my throat tightening. Let me go on with my life without knowing that my daughter was being harassed, threatened, sinking into debt, while you pretended everything was fine? She's really started crying now. I didn't want to disappoint you, she sobbed. You've always done so much for me. I felt stupid for falling for this, for spending it badly, for getting myself into this mess. I didn't want you to look at me with disapproval or with pity. I thought that if I could handle it on my own, it would never affect you. Tears streamed down her face, and mine began to burn in my eyes. The hurt was there, alive, throbbing. But beneath it, there was something even stronger. Fear for her. Fear of what she had lived through alone. Fear of what could have happened. And the mirror? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. At what point did you decide you could sell something you knew meant so much to me? It was an impulse, Mom, she replied, between sobs. I had already tried to think of other things to sell. The computer, the TV, some jewelry, but nothing seemed enough. That's when I looked in the mirror. I looked at it in a way I'd never looked before. Not as a memory, but as money. I thought, she hardly ever talks about it. It's been here for so long, taking up space. If I sell it quickly, she won't even know how much it's worth. She won't have time to stop me. I know it was terrible to think like that. I know. She ran her hand through her hair nervously. I never ever imagined there was anything inside it, Mom. To me, it was just an old mirror, a memory, that I thought could become a solution. The phrase "I thought it could become a solution" kept buzzing in my head. On one side, the hurt throbbed. She tampered with the only piece I've ever carried with me, the strongest link to my mother and grandmother, without consulting me. She betrayed me. Yes, she betrayed my trust, my affection, my history. On the other hand, I clearly saw the figure of a desperate daughter, drowning in debt, afraid of disappointing me, trying to solve things in the most convoluted way possible. This didn't erase the mistake, but it explained the impulse. I took a deep breath, trying to bring order to my feelings. You were afraid of disappointing me, and ended up hurting me much more by hiding everything, I said. You lied, acted behind my back, put our house in the middle of an investigation, exposed our family, messed with something I didn't understand. And all of this because you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth from the beginning. She collapsed. I know, Mom. I know I hate myself for this. I should have spoken up. I should have asked for help. But I felt too grown up to run to you with a financial crisis. I thought I'd get a lecture, that you'd say, "I told you so." I didn't want to hear that. I just wanted to get the weight off my shoulders. I closed my eyes for a moment. The pain I felt wasn't just from the betrayal. It was from the image of a daughter carrying everything alone, out of shame, out of fear of judgment. And then a part of the responsibility inevitably fell on me. Could it be that, without realizing it, I had been too harsh at other times? Too critical? Could it be that, in trying to teach, I made her feel that she couldn't make mistakes, and that if she did, she wouldn't be accepted? Whether or not I lived with that guilt, the fact was one: I was a mother. And, being a mother, I couldn't just point the finger. I needed to assume the role of the one who supports, even if I was hurt. "Look at me," I asked. She lifted her face, wet with tears, afraid of what was to come. "You messed up badly," I said, without softening my blow. "You betrayed me when you decided to mess with something of mine without talking to me. You hurt me. I won't deny that. It's going to take a while for this feeling to settle down inside." She lowered her gaze slightly but continued to stare at me. "But you are my daughter," I continued. "And if there's one thing I won't do, it's let you sink alone. Debt can be resolved. A tarnished name can be fixed. Shame can pass. What cannot be lost is character, truth, and trust. And however wrong you may have been, you still had the courage to admit it. That counts." She cried even more, but I noticed a sense of relief emerging amidst the despair. "Yes, I am hurt," I said. "I am very worried, because you put yourself in a situation that could have become something even more serious. And I also have a huge sense of responsibility, because you are my daughter. And if you've reached this point, I also need to reconsider what kind of space I was giving you to open up to me." She shook her head, denying it. "It's not your fault, Mom. I'm not talking about guilt," I replied. "I'm talking about responsibility. Mine to you and yours to your choices." We remained silent for a few seconds, just looking at each other. What hung in the air now was no longer just tension. It was a mixture of pain and new beginnings, of rupture, and the possibility of reconstruction. "You have no idea what you did when you tried to sell that mirror," I said finally. "Unintentionally, you pulled a thread that brought to light all the dirt hidden behind our history. You hurt me, but you also opened a door to the truth. Now we'll have to deal with both, the family's past and your present." She took a deep breath. You still want to help me?" he asked, afraid of the answer. "I want to, yes," I replied honestly. "But it won't be by coddling you. It will be the right way. With conversation, with a plan, with limits. You will have to face this debt, learn from it, rebuild your relationship with money and with me. I will be by your side, but not as an accomplice to lies, as a mother." She nodded, crying, and finally leaned in to hug me. I hesitated for a second, not for lack of love, but because the wound was still open. Even so, I opened my arms. When she rested her head on my shoulder, I felt the weight of her body collapse. It wasn't just the grown daughter. It was the little girl inside who still needed support. The same girl I once combed her hair in front of that mirror, without knowing what it hid. I closed my eyes and thought of one thing. Sometimes the greatest betrayal doesn't stem from malice. It is born from despair, but it's still betrayal. And yet, it still needs to be confronted. In that embrace, amidst hurt, worry, and a sense of responsibility, I knew we had a long road ahead of us, not only to deal with the police, with the letter, with the truth about our family, but mainly to rebuild something between the two of us, the trust she impulsively broke. And now, we would have to learn to redo it, step by step. When night fell on the house that day, I felt as if everything around me had shifted. The shadows seemed occupied, as if they held stories I hadn't been able to hear before. The absence of the eye mirror on the wall created a strange void, not just visual, but emotional. It was as if a fundamental piece of my identity had been removed, revealing a bare wall that symbolized not only the physical space, but the silence left by so many hidden truths. I ran my fingers along the lighter mark in the paint where the mirror used to sit. For so many years, it had been just an object, a family heirloom, a symbol of love and memory. I had never seen it as anything more than that. I never imagined that such an intimate piece could carry within itself such a great, dense secret, so capable of rearranging everything I believed about my own lineage. And that's when a profound reflection began to take shape within me. Objects have stories. They keep memories. They bear witness to chapters that we have forgotten, ignored, or never learned about. But sometimes they keep much more than that. They keep inconvenient truths to themselves. They keep evidence of past mistakes. They hold the silent cries of someone who tried to do the right thing and failed in life. My family's mirror carried all of that for decades. It hid documents, letters, photos, accusations, and with them, it hid the weight of decisions made even before I was born. It reflected not only faces, but also shadows that no one dared to illuminate. At the same time, in that mirror, I combed my hair when I was a girl. In it, I saw my mother smiling behind me as she adjusted the hem of my dress. I saw my grandmother teaching me how to use her lipstick. I saw my daughter taking her first steps. I saw birthdays, tears, family gatherings, silent dinners, and noisy celebrations. I saw the passage of time imprinted in each new wrinkle on my face. And now, looking at the empty wall, I realized that that object had always carried two stories, the one I knew and the one that had been hidden from me. This duality taught me something far greater than any police revelation could. It taught me about the importance of facing the past, even when it hurts. It taught me about the strength that exists in knowing, and also in what, out of fear, is left behind. It taught me that every family has secrets, but not all of them are told. Sometimes they are inherited, unintentionally, by silent objects that remain there, waiting for the right moment to speak. And in a way, destiny chose the moment. But the mirror didn't just reveal the past. He also displayed the gift. He shed light on something I didn't want to see. My daughter's silent detachment, the crisis she was hiding, the despair that made her act without thinking, the pain she carried alone because she believed she couldn't trust me. It's hard to admit that. It's hard to realize that while I believed I was protecting my family, I was actually leaving voids where trust should have been. The mirror reopened an old wound, and a new one as well, the wound of the past, and the wound between me and my daughter. But it was there, in that moment, that I understood that forgiveness is not an instantaneous gesture. It's a process. It's a bridge rebuilt stone by stone, conversation by conversation, gesture by gesture. I felt hurt, of course. I felt pain. I felt anger that she had interfered with something so important without my permission. But I also felt love. Love for that little girl I watched grow up in front of that mirror. Love for the adult daughter who, even stumbling, was still trying to find her way. Love for the woman who, despite her mistakes, still sought my gaze for support. And I also understood that limits need to exist. Limits are not barriers. They are outlines. These are signs that love also requires respect. I told her that we needed to rebuild our relationship, slowly. I told her that even though she was hurt, I wouldn't give up on her. And she, crying, said she would do whatever it took to regain my trust. For the first time in a long time, I felt that it was possible. The mirror, ironically, showed us this. It showed that when the truth comes out, whether beautiful or horrible, it opens up space for a new beginning. I don't know everything the police are still going to discover. I don't know which names will appear on the documents. I don't know if the letter will clarify everything or raise more questions. I don't know if my family will have to confront a past they preferred to forget, but I know that from now on, nothing will be ignored. Nothing will be swept under the rug. Nothing will remain hidden, behind frames, walls, or reflections. Because now I understand that some things, however painful they may be, need to come to light. And that is why, as I gazed at the empty space where the mirror once stood, I felt a phrase echo in my mind as if it were a whisper from someone who has been with me my whole life. Some truths remain hidden until fate decides to reveal them. And at that moment, I accepted the revelation. I accepted the burden. I accepted the story, the true one, and I decided to move forward with her, not against her. Because in the end, the truth can hurt at first, but always, always free. If this story has captivated you this far, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me bring you more intense stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if you discovered that something in your house was hiding a police secret?